Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel, mgrahamsews. This video tutorial is for this really large bag called the Tailor Beach Bag, and it's by UhOh Creations. This bag is awesome, it's a really quick sew, and it's great for using it for the beach, going to the pool. You could use it as a gym bag because it has the mesh, it'll make it really breathable. Even if you just want an overnight bag and you just want to throw things in the bag really quick and head out, it'll be great for that. You could even use it for a shopping bag. It's got lots of uses. Now, before I discuss some of the features of the bag, there's just a few things that I wanted to go over. First, this video is filmed like a sew along. That means no parts are cut out, no parts are sped up, nothing. You see me sew everything in real time, so you're sewing right along with me. There are some times where I won't show things because we have doubles of it. For example, sewing the handles on, I show you how to sew one side, then I go off camera and I sew the second side. That just helps with the length of the tutorial, and also because I feel it can get a little bit boring for you to just sit there and watch me sew the second side. So when you go to sew the second side, just pause the camera, or pause the video, sorry, and then come back and press play when you're done. The other thing I wanted to mention is I don't show any pattern pieces, no rulers, cutting mats, no measurements are given, nothing. And that's for the protection of the designer, but also because I often film during testing and sometimes things can change, such as a measurement or a placement of hardware or whatever else. So I don't want that to affect my tutorials, so I don't give any of these measurements, not even the seam allowance, when I'm filming. So now that I've given you those couple of things, let's get started talking about some of the features. So first of all, you have these two handles, which makes it really long so it fits nicely on your shoulder and under your arm. The bag has the mesh sides, so it is see-through, so nice and breathable, so anything in here, if it is wet, it'll have the air circulating. And you have a little zipper pocket, perfect for putting your phone in. You can put your wallet in there, or some sunglasses, or maybe even sunscreens if you want. It really depends on what you want to put in there. The bag is finished with binding, so we have the bound bottom and the bound top. I do walk you through how to do all that. If you like this pocket, you could definitely add another one on the other side if you like it, or if you're a bit more of an advanced sewist, you can even add a zipper pocket inside or add a slip pocket here. You could really have fun with this, change it up, and really make it your own however you want. But I really like how simple it is and how big it is, because this will fit a whole family. Like, this would fit my whole family's all 4 towels, all 4 flip-flops, the sunscreen, water. This is huge. It's awesome. And like I said, it'll make a great bag even for shopping, anything. This is a great bag. I really like it. You can have a lot of fun. You can do what I did, which is fussy cut your panels on the front so that you have a focal print. You could do some embroidery. You could even put embroider a name on here so everybody has their own beach bags. A really great bag, and as I said, it comes together quite quickly and very easily. It's a really awesome design. So let's get started making our Tailor Beach Bags. So as always, the very first thing you'll want to do is read through the entire pattern. This will familiarize you with the construction of the bag, but also it's important because designers often give different information regarding different materials to use or different interfacings. So sometimes, depending on materials you're using, you may need to cut a pattern piece out differently. So this is very important to make note of before you begin cutting your pattern pieces so that you don't cut things the wrong size. Once you've read through the entire pattern, you can then go ahead and cut out your material. Now, I will note that the mesh that you need is a different mesh. It's not your normal by Annie's mesh. This is a PVC mesh, so it is a little bit more firm. So you definitely want to make sure you're using that, not your typical like laundry mesh. You want to make sure you have this PVC coated mesh for this bag. So make sure you're using that. You can also use, instead of mesh, if you have it, a clear vinyl or a TPU vinyl if you want. You can definitely just change that up and use that instead, and that would look really cool if you don't have the mesh. So I've got all my pieces cut out already because I've read through the pattern. I've also went ahead and made some marks. Now, it's also important to mark the centers of your pattern pieces, so make all the marks on the centers. So you can see I've done that with this. This is the base, so there's the center there, and there's the center there. I've also cut my zipper to length, and I've cut my webbing to length because I've already gone ahead and read ahead, so I know what the measurements are. And I've made markings on my main. That's for where we're going to be placing our webbing. So once we have that all done and we have it all marked and we have our interfacing fused, so I have my interfacing fused to my exterior pieces, we can go ahead and get started. So the first thing we need is our exterior. So I'm just going to grab my 2 exteriors and my webbing. And I know we only need 1 to start, so I'll put 1 off to the side. Now, in the pattern, Tara has us making some measurements from these long edges over and from the top edge down. You will want to refer to the pattern for where that marking is. I've already gone ahead and made it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to lay one of the webbing handles with the outside edge along the line of the angle that you just drew. So just like that. So it's going to go along the line, and you'll line the bottom of the webbing with the bottom here. So a bit will be protruding on the one edge. So you'll see that it'll protrude here. And you're just going to line it up with that line you drew. I'm going to use some double-sided tape to help hold it in place. Now I may run out of double-sided tape, but I'm going to use some double-sided tape here just to help hold this in place while I sew it. And I'm just going up to where this line is. And this will just help hold it in place while I sew. Now, when you're drawing those lines, I just want to make a note of that. Make sure you're using a fabric safe pen. So try not to use a Frixion pen because that can have ghost lines that reappear. So these little white lines that'll reappear in the different temperatures of weather. So cold or hot, it'll reappear. It has happened to me. So you'll want to use something that you can just wipe away like I did, like a chalk or something that you can just wipe away with water, or just dust it off with your hand or a piece of fabric. I know it's bad, but I use the end of my shirt because it's always with me and I figure just use that. I should really have a cloth with me, but I don't. I keep forgetting to grab one. So I've laid my webbing on the one side. I'm going to take it and I'm going to repeat that on the other side before I top stitch, just to get it down and in place. And I want to make sure that it's not twisted. So what you do is you take it and you lay it flat all the way up, and then you bring it down and around and ensure it's not twisted. And I'm just doing this on this side so I don't have to do that a second time or right after. I can just go right to sewing. So again, making sure it's not twisted, I'm bringing it down and around, and again, lining up the bottom edge and lining it up all the way up. And where your top mark is, you can take your chalk pen and remark it, which I'm out of chalk on this pen. But no fear, I have a second one. And you can mark the line across your webbing because this is where we're going to sew up to and then back down the other edge. So you can mark that line like I did on your webbing, just like that, so you know where to stop. So we're going to sew up one edge of the webbing, across where this line is, and back down the other side. And we're going to repeat that for both sides. And this one's off a little bit, so I'm just going to redo it, which means that my line is off slightly, so I'll have to fix that when I'm sewing. All right. So I didn't put thread in my machine. I don't know how I thought I was going to sew without thread. So I'm just going to pause the camera and go put some thread in my machine. That's kind of funny that I actually forgot that. I was just excited to get going on this. And then I'll come back and we will stitch this all down. All right, so I've got my thread on my machine. We are good to stitch our handles down. So again, we're going to stitch up one side of the webbing across where this line is that we drew at the top and back down the other side. And we're going to do that for both sides of the webbing. And don't forget to back stitch at start and stop. Now at the top here, if you want, you can back stitch over this if you want some extra reinforcement at the top. So I backstitched at the top a few times just for that extra reinforcement. Trim your threads. And then we'll stitch the other side. Maybe that shouldn't be on my table, because if I roll over that, that'll be a mess. All right, now for the other side, same thing. Stitch up the one side, across at the top, and then I'm going to back stitch a few times. Trim the threads, and now we have one handle attached. Now we need to trim this up at the bottom so that it is even with the panel. So you're going to trim your webbing, and then you can seal these using your favorite method, just to ensure they don't fray. So there it is. Our webbing is now attached. So I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to repeat that for this second side. I don't feel you need to sit and watch me do that. So I'm going to attach my second handle, and then I will come back and we will continue on with constructing our bag. All right, so I've attached the handle to the second main. So as you can see, they're both attached, and I wiped it off, and I didn't use my shirt. I'm pretty proud of myself. I realized I have this oven mitt for when I'm pressing bags, and I just used that to dust it off. I don't know why I never thought of that before. Pretty proud of myself that I didn't use my shirt, and I think everybody should be proud of me too. So I have them both attached. Now we need to move one out of the way and take one of our mesh, and remember, the top of the mesh is the wider edge. The top of your exterior main is the smaller edge. So we're going to take one of the angled edges of the mesh, and I know it's a little bit hard to see on camera, but one of the angled edges of the mesh, and we're going to align it with one of the side angle edges of the main and clip it all together all the way up. And as I mentioned previously, you can use a clear vinyl for this. It is a beach bag, so if you want to use the clear vinyl, you can. Then you'll be able to still see the contents inside your bag, and it'll keep it so that it'll keep everything inside from making other things wet. So for example, if you put this in your car and it lays down, it'll also help prevent, if it's on the side, things getting wet. So now what we need to do is baste this edge. So baste all the way up the side edge. And depending on your machine too, if you're on an industrial, you may be able to get away with making this from all vinyl. If you have a thinner vinyl, you can use all vinyl for this and really make it completely waterproof if you want, or water resistant if you want. It wouldn't be really waterproof because some of the seams it could still leak through, but you could make it waterproof. So when you flip that over, as you can see, it's hard to see, but we do have the beginnings of our bag. So keep that flipped just like that for now. Now what we need to do is take one of our lining mains, and we're going to lay it on top. I'm just going to move my zipper over here so I don't lose it. Lay it on top of our exterior, again, lining up that side edge that we just sewed our mesh to. So clip it in place, and then we'll sew this with a full seam allowance. So we're not basting it, we're sewing it with a full seam allowance. And I'm just going back to check to make sure, yes, because so many different patterns that I make, seam allowances are different for each one, so I wanted to make sure I had the correct one. So sewing this with your full seam allowance, starting at the bottom, and don't forget to backstitch. And use the seam allowance or the stitch length that you like to use for stitching bags together for this part. When you're basting, you can use a longer stitch length. Trim your threads, which mine are tucked in. And now what we need to do is we need to press both the fabrics so that the mains are wrong sides together. And you can take this to your iron and press it. However, Tara does warn to be cautious pressing your materials. Some meshes and webbings can melt. So I'm just putting clips on this side because it's going to make it easier for me to press this. And I'm just finger pressing it all the way down. Oh, you know what? I have a seam roller. I always forget about this. I'm telling you, sometimes I forget about the tools I have, and I don't know why. I think I just like making things a little bit more difficult on myself. And I just got this at a hardware store. It's actually for wallpaper, but it does the trick. I always forget I have it. All right, so now it is pressed. And now we're going to top stitch along this seam here, just on that seam. So along the seam on top of the mains to help hold this all pressed in place. So top stitch using your favorite top stitch length. Oh, 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 oh. My handle's caught on my chair. And you're stitching all the way up that side. Cut your threads. Return your stitch length back to your length you use for stitching a bag together. And that's how that looks so far. It looks so pretty. I love how top stitching just really gives it a nice finishing touch. So now what we need to do is we need to place our sewn exterior main, oops, excuse me for a moment, right side up, move the lining out of the way. So that means I need to move these clips. So you're going to move your lining out of the way just like that. And you're going to place the second mesh on top of the main exterior on the opposite side that we just sewed. And again, remember, the mesh will have the wider edge. So your wider edge, oh, you can see it here. Your wider edge is the top along this second side that you didn't attach your mesh to previously. So I'm just going to flip this around so I can see it. I know it's upside down for you, but so lining is out of the way. And the first mesh is out of the way. We're only attaching this to our main. So I like to pin the top and the bottom. now we're going to baste this. And remember, you can use a longer stitch length for basting, because what basting is doing is it's holding the layers temporarily for you. It does add a bit of extra security too for the layers, but it is just holding this for you. Trim your threads. Oops. Return your stitch length. Now we need to pull that lining main that's attached to this piece around to the front and making sure that that mesh is right sides down. So your first mesh, you may kind of want to just roll it up and then bring this around to this side, just like this. So everything here is going to be in the center. So did you see how I did that? So here's the mesh we just attached, the second mesh, and our lining. So roll up your first mesh that you attached, just roll it all the way up so that you'll be able to bring this lining over to the other side of your main and clip it in place. So everything is sandwiched or squished in between all these layers. So see how everything is in there right now? Nothing is sticking out. Well, it's sticking out the bottom, but nothing is sticking out the sides. So now we're going to sew this with the full seam allowance, just like we did on the previous side. And don't forget to back stitch at start and stop. Use your favorite stitch length for stitching a bag together. Okie dokie. My thread was eaten up inside. Now we need to pull it out, so we need to turn it out through the bottom or the top. So I'm doing it through the bottom. So this is how yours is going to look. You're going to have these two mesh pieces sticking out the side and your exterior and lining. And we're going to press this again, and I'm going to remember to use my seam roller this time. Press it really good, and again, you can go to your iron. I didn't even bother plugging my iron in, so the temptation wasn't there to use it. I will need it after, but I didn't want to have it where I have the temptation to use it because I don't want to accidentally hit this mesh. All right, so my seams are all pressed. Now I'm going to top stitch again this seam just like we did on the other side. Oh, going from the top to the bottom, or bottom to top, however you're comfortable. And just make sure nothing else is underneath your presser foot too when you're sewing, because you don't want this piece of mesh or the mesh on the other side of it to get stuck underneath. So you'll want to hold the mesh too as you're sewing. I don't know where those threads are going. Return your stitch length. Oh, there it is. Back to the length you use when you stitch. Don't forget to do that. I see a thread here. So that's how it's looking so far. So pretty, I love it. And I did fussy cut this so the owl would be centered, but I love it, and I love it. There's the two owls at the bottom too, peeking at you. So now what we need to do is place the remaining main exterior right sides up. And this is the first time I'm making this bag. I did read over the pattern, but it's sort of hard to remember everything. So that's why I keep stopping to read. So we're placing this right side up, and we're going to take these constructed main exterior with the two mesh attached and lay it so the exterior side is down, and the angled side of the mesh again is lined up with the angle side of your main. So this exterior is going to be facing down. It's going to be pretty sides down, and it's going to be pretty sides against this side, but you're looking at your lining right now. So if your lining of this constructed exterior is facing up, you have it right. So clip it together, and we're making a really long piece right now. And essentially what we're doing here is all the same steps, but we have this constructed exterior already attached. So now that that is there, we're going to baste those two pieces together. And again, you can use a longer stitch length for basting. Just make sure once you're done basting, you switch back to your regular stitch length. Trim any threads. Now we're going to attach the remaining lining to that exterior. So place your lining pretty sides down, so you have that mesh sandwiched in between and your exterior is still right sides up. Line up the angled edges, clip it in place. All right, sort of a lot of clips right down here. I'm going to move them. There we go. So there we go. We have the lining, mesh, exterior. So lining is right sides against the mesh, and it's also, if you look through the mesh, it's right sides against your exterior. So it's pretty sides touching the mesh, pretty sides touching the mesh. So you have a sandwich of a mesh here. So sewing this with your full seam allowance all the way up the side. Now we need to, again, press both those fabrics away from each other, so away from the mesh. And I'm going to add clips again just to sort of help hold it, just like I did the first time. Just helps hold it in place, and I'm going to use my seam roller. We're dealing with a long piece right now. Ooh, my thread. Oh no, it just caught the thread somewhere. Uh-oh. Luckily it didn't unthread, or did it unthread from the needle? I think it did. The mesh snagged my thread. So now I have to re-thread my whole machine. That's okay, it doesn't take long. Sorry about that. So just be careful when you're flipping your mesh and everything around that it doesn't snag your thread. I'll do that after. So we need to top stitch that edge again, just like we did previously. So switch to your favorite stitch length and go ahead and top stitch that edge that we just pressed. So I'm just going to re-thread my machine. So now we're going to top stitch that. So I'm going to roll this up because this is going to be in the way. So I'm just going to roll it up. That'll make it easier. So I'm just top stitching all the way up that edge that we just pressed. Returning my stitch length. Trimmed my threads. And now we have a piece that is long. I'm going to remove these clips first. So we have this long piece, and I'll put it this way because you can kind of see it. So you have your main and your lining, mesh, main and lining, mesh. Now what we need to do is pull this piece and move the lining out of the way. You want the lining out of the way completely. You're just working with the main right now again. You're going to bring this mesh that's not sewn to anything on the other side over to the main. So just the mesh and the main are being attached, just like we did the first time when we attached the mesh and the main. And you move the lining out of the way, so just make sure that lining is moved out of the way. So see it here, you can see my lining dangling. The lining is not attached right now. All right, so mesh and main attached, and that's the mesh that's not attached to anything, that side, and the side of the main that we have nothing attached to. So raw edges. Trim any threads. And now we're going to pull the lining over. And this is where it might seem a bit tricky. So you have your lining under here. You want to do the same thing we did before. I'm going to tuck my handle in just so that it stays out of the way. And I'm going to roll this up so that everything is inside where the main is. So if you roll up the main that's already attached and the lining that's already attached to one side, if you roll that up, you'll have your lining exposed and your exterior here that we just sewed the mesh to exposed. You'll bring the lining over to the raw edge, so it's raw edge with raw edge of the main and the lining, just like that, and everything again is rolled inside. So I'll show you that one more time. So I just sewed the mesh to this side of my exterior, so I have like a tube right now with one piece of my lining off to the side. So raw edge of my main is right here beside me, and the raw edge of my lining right here is right there. And those two raw edges need to come together. So what I did was I tucked my handles inside this tube. Then I'm taking this material here that's in this tube and I'm going to roll it up just like that. And then I'm going to grab my lining and bring it so it's raw edge meets the raw edge of my main on the other side. So just like that, clip the top and the bottom, and we have a tube of just the main and the lining with all the other layers in between. So everything's sandwiched in there. And the main and lining raw edges line up. Those angled edges line up. Nothing else is there. It's just the main that we just finished sewing the mesh to and the lining. That's it. That's the only thing in there. And you can see if you look inside this tube, you can see all my other layers inside rolled up. Now we're going to sew this with a full seam allowance from one end to the other. Don't forget to back stitch. Caught on my microphone. Alrighty. Trim your threads. And this is where we're going to turn the exterior and lining mains so that they are together and right sides out. So I'm going through the bottom and I'm going to just turn it right sides out, just like that. And this is where you'll see your bag already taking shape because we've just made this tube. And this is a mighty big bag. I can't wait to use this. Now we need to press those fabrics again. And this is where it's tricky because you are in a tube and I know you can't really see what I'm doing, but I'm pressing my fabrics. I'm just going inside here. You can see with the mesh. Inside and pressing. And then on this side, I'm going to press it. And now we have to top stitch. And we're top stitching in a tube. So it might seem a bit tricky, but you can do it. So I'm going to show you how I do this. So starting on one end, increase my stitch length, back stitch, and then I just go slowly feeding it through. You'll have all this material here, but you just keep pulling it down towards you, making sure everything is flat underneath and nothing else is there but the lining and main, so all your seam allowance. Making sure your handles don't get stuck underneath. You just keep feeding it, keeping everything nice and smooth. And then, got caught on my handle. Pull it out and we're done. You can already see your bag taking shape. Now, Tara does instruct that if your mesh and body of your bag are not flat and flush with each other, to go ahead and trim them. So I do have these little triangles here that I'm going to trim off. I don't think I need to trim, yeah, I need to trim a little bit here. Somehow my lining was a bit bigger at the top. So I've got that all trimmed up. You can even take this to your ruler and mat and use your ruler and rotary cutter to trim it so it's nice and straight if you want. Mine's good enough. There we go. So I've trimmed it all up, but don't trim any of the handles at the bottom. Don't trim anything down there. Now, what we need to do is baste these raw edges together along the top and the bottom. And for this, again, you can use a longer seam length, stitch length. You just want to hold these together. I'll go and trim my threads later. the other thing I'm going to do is any of the threads that are coming from your fabric, so you get your little like fraying edges sort of, you can go ahead and trim those threads too, so that they're not there when we go to attach binding. Excuse me. So I'm going to trim those fraying edges. I use my bigger scissors. Again, don't trim your webbing. Leave that how it is. I'm just trimming the longer threads, which is kind of awkward. But sometimes that happens, so we just trim them away, giving it a little haircut. And I didn't sew this side, did I? Or it didn't catch my lining. My lining shifted, so I'm going to sew it from this side. If that happened to you, just go ahead and rebaste anything down that didn't get caught. The lining kind of shifted. Trim all your threads. You don't want any peekaboo threads later. All right. Return your stitch length, and our exterior is complete for now. I'm just going to put this off to the side. That's how it looks when you look inside. Now we're going to make our zipper pocket. So we need our zipper pocket pieces. Oops. So I'm just going to grab them. So here they are, and our zipper for a zipper pocket. So we need to place the lining zipper pocket bottom piece so it is right sides up, and lay the zipper right side up on top and centered. So I'm going to find the center mark, and if your zipper pull is not attached, you can go ahead and attach it now. I'm just finding my center mark. Finding the center mark on here, and all I do is just fold it in half and crease it. Done. So we're placing the zipper right side up on top, centering it. And I just realized I didn't put it so that my zipper is facing the right way. It says the zipper is to be closed with the zipper head to the right when it's closed. It really is a personal preference though. If you want to put it the other way, you can. So now we need to baste along the top raw edge. Don't forget to move your zipper pull out of the way. It creates a little bit of a bump and it makes it hard to get around. So this will help give you a straight zipper. Now we need to place the zipper pocket bottom, the exterior, right sides down on top. Lining up the side edges so that everything's straight. Now, clip it in place. So the zipper is now sandwiched between the exterior and the lining, and we're going to sew this with a full seam allowance. Now I need to switch to a zipper foot so I can sew this properly. Let me find my zipper foot. Nope. It's hiding in here. Here it is. All right, now we're going to sew this with a full seam allowance. I'm approaching my zipper pull, so I'm going to slide it out of the way. Now we need to press both the layers away from each other. And I can do this with my hands. I'm just going to finger press it. There's a thread poking up through here. I don't know why. Continuing on, pressing the fabrics. You can take this to your iron and press it. Now I'm going to top stitch this under the zipper. Cut my threads. Return my stitch length back to my length I used for stitching. And now we need to place the zip pocket lining right sides up on our table. So this is my zip pocket lining. We're going to place it right sides up and place the zipper right sides up on top. So I'm just marking the center. And we're going to line it up with the center of the zipper pocket. So it's right sides up. Zipper is going right sides up on top and centered. And another thing you want to make sure is that you're lining everything up on the side edges as well. Sometimes things shift a little, so we want to make sure everything's lined up. Perfect. Oops. So you want to make sure that you have it centered, but also everything on the sides here is lined up. There we go. So now we're going to baste this in place. And then we need to now take our exterior and place it so it is right sides together with the zipper, lining up those side edges again and the center. And then we're going to sew this with a full seam allowance. And I just want to make sure, yeah. So again, that zipper is sandwiched in between the lining and exterior. And when you get close to where your zipper pull is, slide it out of the way. You could have also done this without the zipper pull already on and just attached it right after we're done this step, if you prefer, if it's easier for you. Now we're going to press these fabrics, just like we did for the bottoms, away from the zipper. Again, take this to your iron if you want and give it a press. Top stitch this. All the way through all the layers. Return your stitch length before you forget. All right, so now that we've top stitched this edge here, we need to bring the exterior up to meet the top of the pocket top. So we're going to bring it up, clip it in place. So you're just bringing the exterior up there right now. The lining is not coming up to the top just yet. So clip that in place. We'll flip this over, and then we're going to bring the lining up to meet the top of the pocket top. So all those raw edges are aligned. Make sure your side edges are aligned too. So you have your side edges aligned and your raw edges aligned at the top. You can also add clips if you'd like along the sides here, because we're going to sew these sides using the seam allowance given in the bottom pattern. We're not going to sew the top, we're just sewing the sides. So we're just sewing these two sides, that's it, and we'll sew it with a full seam allowance. So I'm going to switch from my zipper foot back to my regular presser foot. And my presser foot, my foot pedal slid out of the way on me accidentally because I kicked it. Make sure your zipper pull is not in the way while you're sewing here. Sew all the way to the bottom. Back stitch when you get to the bottom. And I have my zipper in the center so that I don't hit that zipper pull at all. Oh, I thought my machine stopped working. It just wasn't pushing the pedal down enough. Now what we need to do is trim this seam allowance. And I'm using pinking shears for this. Trim your seam allowances, just like instructed in the pattern. Careful not to trim your stitches though. Now if you want, before we turn this right sides out for some extra security, you can stitch over the area where the zipper is. Just going to clean that up. So right where this zipper is, you can stitch over that area. It just adds some extra security. Not necessary, but I like doing it for the extra security. now we're going to turn it right sides out through the top raw edge. You may need to use a little turning tool. And if you look inside, you have your zipper pocket. This will be sealed off because we're going to attach this to the top of your bag. But what we need to do first is we need to go and press this. So I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to give this a really good pressing, and then we'll come back and we'll attach it to our bag. All right, so I've pressed this really well. One thing I'm going to do is just baste across these top edges to really help hold it in place before I stitch it to the bag. This is just something I just want to do to make sure that nothing shifts on me. So I just basted across that. That's just a personal choice. That's not something written in the pattern. And I'm just trimming all the little threads at the top here. There we go. Cleaning it up. Now we're going to take this pocket and we're going to place it on the lining. So your bag should still be wrong sides out. We never turned it or anything. So place it on the lining. Find the center of your lining. I have a center mark there, and the center of your pocket. And all you need to do is just fold it in half, and that gives you where the center is. And line up the center point. So your lining is right sides up and your pocket is right sides up. That zipper is facing out. Clip it in place. Something seems a little bit off here, or maybe it's not. No, it was fine. Never mind. So again, your lining is right sides up and your pocket is going right sides up on top of your lining. And we're going to baste this in place. Make sure that there's no handles or anything in the way. And if you did what I did, which was basted that top edge of the pocket, you're just stitching right on top of those basting stitches. Just trimmed all my threads. So there's your pocket attached. So when you open it up, you've got a nice little pocket there. Now, with the bag body flattened, you need to measure along the bottom edge of the mesh and make a mark. So we're measuring along the bottom edge of the mesh on the ends. So you're folding it like this so that the two exteriors are together. And I'm not going to be able to do this on camera. I'm going to have to go off camera and make these marks because I don't show any rulers or anything on camera. But you're flattening it, and then you're going to measure in and up. So I'm going to go off camera and make the marks, and you're going to measure along the bottom edge. So you're going to mark and sew up to that mark. So I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to make that mark. So the first mark is going to be measured in from this side edge of your mesh, and then the second mark is going to be up from the bottom edge of the mesh. So first mark from the side, second mark up. So I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to do that, and then we'll continue on. All right, so I've made those marks at the bottom of each corner. So now I'm going to sew up that mark I made going up to the second mark we made. So remember, we made a mark coming over from the bottom edge corner and then a mark up. So from the side over and a mark from the bottom up. And we're going to sew where those lines meet. So we're going to sew up to where that line meets, making sure your mesh is flattened. And it may seem a bit weird because we're kind of sewing through mesh here, so it's going to be a bit awkward. And then you sew right back down the mesh. So you sew up the mesh and down the mesh. your back stitching. And I backstitched quite a bit just to really make sure that that stayed in place, grabbing at the wrong things. Now what we're going to do is open up the mesh panels and flatten that pinched edge here. So you're just going to flatten it. So you can take the center of the pinch, so the side here, and push it against where the seam is that you just sewed so that everything stays nicely centered. And then add clips. So the side seam will line up with the stitching you did. And then clip it in place. So one more time. I've got the side seam here because I still have it folded. My seam for where I sewed is right here. I'm going to take this side seam, because I can see it here, and I'm going to bring it so that it meets that stitching, and that'll make it nice and centered, just like that. And now we're going to baste this pleat in place. And you can backstitch a couple times just to really help secure it. There we go. I'm going to cut any threads if I can see them. I use such a light color of thread, it's hard to see it with the white mesh. There we go. So now we have our pleats created. So if you look, you can see how it's formed, the pleat, and it kind of gives a curved edge on the outsides. So now we're going to turn the body of the bag inside out. The lining will be on the outside, which mine already is. My lining is on the outside. So your pleats are on the inside and your pleats go like that on the outside. So you want your lining on the outside. And I'm going to put this, and you have to see the center markings on your main panels. So if you can't see, sorry, I'm just reading as I'm going. If you can't see your center markings on your main panels, go ahead and make sure you can see those now. So I'm making my marks. I can see where they are because when I folded my material to cut it. So I'm just making all my center markings now. Now I'm going to place this to the side for now. We need to grab our base. So grab your lining and place it so it is right sides down, and set the exterior base with the stabilizer right side up. So they'll be wrong sides together. And what I'm going to do here is before I do this, I'm going to transfer all my marks. So you may want to do this now, and I'm transferring them within my seam allowance so that I won't see them when the bag is done. I'm just transferring all my marks, and I can see them on this side because I folded this. Whoops. So just transferring all those center marks because these are very important for later. So again, exterior wrong sides together with the lining. I'm going to clip it in place. And I'm clipping at all my center marks first. And then we're going to baste around the entire edge of the base. excuse me. I'm going to use a longer stitch length to baste around the base. And I'm just going to go all the way around, basting it together. Oops. Hear my chair making noises because of the way I sit on it, it turns it. Trim any threads. And there we go. We have our base all sewn together. Return your stitch length back to the length you use. Now we're going to take the base and we're going to put it right side up, and we're going to place the body of the bag on top with the fabric centered along the long sides. So this edge, your mains, are going to be centered on the long sides of your base. So the long sides of the fabric, main A, are centered on the base. Clip it together. And I'm just going to add some clips just to help hold it. And then I'll go back and I'll clip the other side in place. So there's one. Now take the other side of the base and clip it so that the long edge matches the long edge of the exterior main. I just broke another clip. So what we're going to do first is we're going to baste along the long edges first. So you're going to start where your main is and go all the way across. So where this edge of the main is, and you're going to go all the way to the other edge where the other main is, or the other end of the main, sorry. And I have a thread here that got stitched in. Now remember, we're binding this, so this will be all hidden later with the binding. So we're going to sew these together, starting from the main corner here all the way to the other corner on the main, where the main meets the mesh. So just the straight edges. And you're basting it in place right now. So there's one edge. Now let's repeat that for the second edge. Whoops. Trim all your little threads. All right, now you need to take the pleats, and the center of the pleat will line up with the center mark on your base. So the center of the pleat will line up with the center mark on the base, and you're going to clip it all the way around. You're clipping the curved edge all the way around. To put this on my lap because it's so big. So do that for both sides. Center of the pleat, and you know where that is because that's where your stitching is, lines up with the center mark on your base, and then clip the rest of the way, easing that fabric through those curves. And it's helpful that we've sewn those straight edges because we don't have to worry about those right now. We're just worrying about this curved edge here on the side. So just like that. Now we're going to baste that curved edge here. So start where we stopped previously and go all the way around. And if you need, you can use a stiletto here to help hold everything in place for you, because the mesh will want to shift a little bit. So just take your time. Oh, take your time. Sorry about the noise my chair is making. It's unfortunate, but that's the way I sit on the chair that causes that. For some reason, this side seems to be going better than the other side. It's kind of funny. Trim all your threads. Even your fraying ones, if there is any. All right, so now we have that all attached. So the other thing is you can place snips if you want when you're sewing around that edge to help the fabric open up and get around that curve nicer if you need to. I didn't. It worked out fine. So that's how it looks so far. So I'm just going to open it up this way so you can see. So you can see the bottom is all attached. We have our bag so far. It looks really nice. I'm just going to place this off to the side for a moment. We need to grab our binding pieces. And what we need to do is we need to have one so it is right sides up and place the other one so it is right sides together and sew diagonally across from corner to corner all the way across at a 90-degree angle. Now you can use some pins to pin this in place, and then you can use your ruler to make the mark, the line, so that you can follow on that line. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to pin these together, and then I'm going to draw the line from corner to corner because that's where we're going to sew. So I'll do that and then I'll come right back and all of mine will be attached. So remember, first one goes right sides up, then you pin it, and what I like to do is pin on either side of the line that I'm going to draw. So there's one pin there, and I'm going to draw a line I know in the center. So here's another pin, keeping the pin away from where I'm drawing, and then I'll draw a line from this corner to this bottom corner. And then once I have that done, I'll flip this over right sides together, and I'll keep doing the same thing. So remember, it's right sides up. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that all now, and then I'll come back and I'll have all my lines drawn and we'll be able to sew this together. Now I do have a few more pieces because I didn't have long enough pieces when I cut, but I knew we were going to be trimming this to a specific length for each thing that we need. So I cut a few extra pieces. So in the pattern, she only had us cut 3. I had to cut 4 just so that I had enough. So I'll go draw those lines, I'll pin it together, I'll draw the lines, and then I'll come back. All right, so I have everything pinned and everything marked. Now we're going to sew on those lines that I made. So all the way down on each line, back stitching at start and stop. remove the pins once I'm done. So you're just sewing from corner to corner. Now I'm going to remove all my pins, and then we will trim these up. Before I trim them though, I always like to check to make sure that they're all facing the right way, which they are. So I'm going to trim these. Open it up. It is. Trim it. Got them all trimmed. All right, so now what we need to do is we need to press our seams open, and I just realized there's one seam here that I did not trim. So we need to press these seams open. So I need to go off camera to press that open. Once I have all my seams pressed open, there's two lengths that we need to cut our binding to. So we will refer to the pattern and cut them. I'm going to do that off camera because I can't do that on camera. I can't show measurements. So I will do that off camera. Then we'll come back and we're going to repeat the same process that we did to attach these binding pieces together for that piece. And you're going to end up with a circle of binding. So I'm going to go off camera, I'm going to press these all open, and then I will come back and we will stitch them all together because I'll have them trimmed to the length that I need. All right, so I have my binding pieces pressed at the seam, so it's pressed open, and then I've cut my binding to the length needed. Now we need to repeat that same step that we did when we made the binding one long strip. So you take your binding, and I'm going to fold it in half, so now it's folded in half, and then I'm going to bring this edge so that it meets on an angle, just like that. So now I brought it around, and I need my pins again because I'm pinning it in place. And I'm just going to eyeball when I sew, but I'm going to draw the mark at the bottom. So you're making a tube with this binding. So lay it down flat. Bring the other edge, so it's flat. Bring this other raw edge over so that it meets just like this. Same thing we did previously. And they're right sides together. So you have this little tube, it looks like this. Now I'm going to sew down from corner to corner. I'm just going to move that pin so it's not in my way. Normally I like to draw the line, but for video purposes, I won't stop again. Remove both pins. Now I've marked a T on my piece, that's my top binding, and the T is going to get cut off, so I'm just going to mark the T again on here. Move things out of the way. Try to keep my table as clear as possible so it's easier for me. And I did write that this was for the base, but again, I just trimmed that off. So that doesn't really help, but at least I have the T on the one that's for the top. I'm just going to finger press my piece open, but before you trim too, make sure that it's not twisted. So see how I've made a tube? Make sure it's not twisted. I'm just finger pressing this seam open. And again, I know I trimmed and I shouldn't have, but I checked it, it's good. And I'm finger pressing this seam open, just like that. There we go. So we have our two pieces created. Now what we need to do is fold both the pieces in half and press them well. So I do have to go back to my iron, but we're going to fold them in half and press it well. And you're going to do that for both the pieces all the way around. And when I'm there, I'm also going to trim any of these threads that are coming undone or out. So my little hairs here, I'll give it a little haircut once I have it all pressed. So I'm going to go do that, then I'll come back and we will continue on. All right, so I have it pressed in half all the way around, both pieces, the top and the bottom, and I marked which one's the top. So this is the top. So starting with the bottom piece, what we're going to do is I'm going to start on the side that is going to be the bottom of the bag, so on the bottom, and I'm going to clip it in place. And what I'm going to do too is I'm actually going to find all the center marks. So I'm going to mark where the centers are, my quarter markings, I guess, and I'm going to line these up with the quarter markings on the base, just so that I have it going all the way around the same amount, just like that. And now I'm going to clip where those quarter markings are, lining up the raw edges all the way around. And all this does is just make sure that I'm getting an even amount all the way around. I'm not running into any issues where there's not enough binding. And I'm lining up all my raw edges. And I did give this a little haircut, but I can still see some threads that need to be trimmed away. So I'm just clipping it in place all the way around, and you can start on whatever side you want. This is my personal preference, because I like to flip it over and come on this side to do the final stitching. And like I said, I matched up the quarter markings, so this means it's going to be even all the way around. So when I go to attach the top binding, I'll do the exact same thing. Find those quarter markings and match it all the way around. I do that when I'm making garments for the neck, so I just figure it makes it easier. You make sure you get your fabrics evenly distributed throughout. Now we're going to sew this using the seam allowance given in the pattern. I'm going to bring my little clip bin over here, clip bowl. Just going to lessen my presser foot tension a bit. And just make sure when you're sewing that everything underneath is also flat and you're not getting anything caught in the seam allowances that shouldn't be there. I just made sure my camera was still going because I couldn't remember if I hit record. I panicked. Again, it's still lining sides out when you're doing this. You'll notice my lining is still facing out. And I'm just sewing all the way around, going around those curves. Cut your threads. Now we're going to take this binding and we're going to wrap it over the edge here, covering that first row of stitching. So you're just covering it. Place some clips and continue doing that all the way around. And for me, I'm going to turn it this way so I can see what I'm doing and any threads that I can see. So I'm just covering my stitching. So it's going to be even on both sides. And you'll notice that the binding wants to go over too. It sort of pulls in the corners and it wants to come around. And another thing, if your binding is not perfect, don't panic. It's at the bottom of the bag. No one's going to see this. You can also use a thread that matches, and even some double-sided tape will help hold everything in place while you stitch it. So come around this corner. So I'm just clipping it in place around the corners. This is where I start getting excited because I know we're almost done. And these threads I didn't clip here. Sometimes I can just tuck some threads up inside so that they don't stick out. Again, if you want, you can use double-sided tape to help hold this in place. You can even use fold-over elastic or pre-made binding. Usually I'll use pre-made binding, but I really wanted my binding to match my bag. All right, now we are ready to top stitch this in place all the way around. So you just top stitch it in place all the way around. You can use a walking foot if you feel like your machine is having a hard time sewing this, but we did keep all the interfacing out of the seam allowances, so it shouldn't have a hard time. You can also try using a bigger needle. Sometimes that helps. A walking foot, a humper jumper, or a bigger needle. And again, I'm not going to be concerned about what the underside looks like because it's inside my bag. I just got to get this pulled over a little bit. There we go. right, trim your threads. And again, I'm not concerned with how the bottom looks, but it actually looks good, which is funny. Every time I say that, it looks a lot better than I was thinking it would. Now I'm going to tuck my handles down inside my bag because we need to attach the binding to the top of the bag. And my binding is on the floor. Ow. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to find the quarter markings for this. And place a pin or clip, sorry. So there's one. There's another. And I'm going to start with this on the lining and then flip it over to the exterior. You always want the exterior to look nicer than the lining, because as I said, nobody really looks in the lining. I mean, they do, but they don't, if that makes sense. We have our center marks here, but I need to make sure I have my center marks for my mesh. So I'm going to add a clip at the top where that center mark is on the mesh, just like that. And like that. There we go. Now we can start clipping the mesh or the binding to the top of the bag. So take your binding, and I like to bring it around into the bag, or the bag into the binding. And I'm just clipping at the quarter marks. And then I'm going to clip the rest of the way around. So when I'm doing this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew it with the binding against the bed of my machine, because the mesh may get stuck. This way here, it'll glide nicely, because the mesh could get stuck on my feed dogs. So I will sew it with the mesh against my presser foot rather than against my feed dogs. Excuse me. Just make sure your raw edges are aligned. And there is a bit of bulk here at the top where this pocket is. So again, use a walking foot or a humper jumper or a bigger needle to get through that. And we're going to baste this first side using the seam allowance given in the pattern. So again, I'm sewing so that my binding is against the bed of my machine and my mesh is against my presser foot. That's just so that my mesh doesn't get caught on my feed dogs, because that does happen, that the mesh can get caught on the feed dogs. And you just sew all the way around till we get back to where we started. Make sure there's nothing else underneath but the binding and the top of the bag. Make sure your zipper pocket is nice and flat when you go under there. Make sure that zipper too, if you have a dangly pull, is down so you don't hit it. fixing my mesh, or my binding. It kind of moved out of the way, but my mesh is in the way. It's not letting me fix it. There we go. Woo! All right, cut any threads. Now, same thing as we did for the exterior, for the bottom, sorry, not exterior, for the bottom. We're going to bring our mesh and wrap it around towards the front and clip it in place. Now, the nice thing is when you get to the mesh side, you can see where it is and you can line it up nicely so it all lines up. That's the nice thing about the mesh. You can see through it and get everything all lined up perfectly at the top. So when you fold it over, where it's folded, you can see it and you can line up the bottom edges of the binding so that everything is nice and neat for you. So you see how I'm lining up? I can see through the mesh, there's the bottom, and I'm lining up both bottom edges. When I fold over the binding, I line up the bottom edges so that it's even all the way around the top. Again, you can use some double-sided tape here if you want to help hold everything in place for you. I'm just going to use a whole lot of clips. Trying to do this so you can see what I'm doing too, but I'm just flipping the binding over the top of the mesh, over top of the mesh, placing it so that the bottoms that I can see through the mesh are even. And I'm just going to continue clipping it all the way around. So I'm going to pause the camera and I'm going to finish clipping all the way around, just because this is going to get a little bit boring. I'm only not even halfway through yet. So I'm going to do that and then I'll come back and we will sew our top binding down. So I'm just going to continue clipping all the way around and then I'll be right back. So I have it all clipped all the way around. Now we just need to top stitch this down. So I'm going to start. Actually, first I'm going to check and make sure I have enough in my bobbin, which I do. Always check your bobbin before you do your final top stitching. You don't want to run out of bobbin thread. I'm going to start with some long thread tails. It'll make it easier to cut those threads after. So I'm going to start back stitching. Just going to pick a spot and go for it. And just sew all the way around. When you're going around where the mesh is, make sure you're catching both sides of the binding. So I can see both sides of the binding are being caught. Got to make sure that that pocket stays down too. Make sure your handles are also out of the way. keep the handles pushed down into your bag. And I'm just making sure I'm catching everything, which I am. Beautiful. There goes my chair again, rubbing on my table. There we are. I'm going to clip all my threads and I'm just going to double check. Now, if there was an area that you missed, you can always hand sew it together. So with a slip stitch, whoops, so that you don't have to go back over and stitch it a second time. I have caught everything all the way around. Now I'm going to turn my bag right sides out. And you'll find the binding at the bottom of the bag kind of gives the bottom a bit of structure. Helps push the bottom of the bag out and give it its shape. It's nice shape, and it almost looks like it creates a binding on the bottom of the bag, the way the bag sits with the binding. So just press everything. Flip your pocket into your bag. And it's a big bag, so it's hard to see on camera, but look at that. We have it all completed. You've got it bound inside. Mine matches. I like it. And we have the binding at the top. You're ready to take your beach bag out and show it off to the world. Now, before you take your bag out, don't forget to take pictures and post them all over social media using the hashtags given in the pattern, because we all want to see your beautiful bags, and even take some pictures of it in use when you're at the beach or at a pool, or even if you just use this, say, for a gym bag, whatever you want to use this for, take pictures of it in use because we love seeing those pictures. I hope you enjoyed sewing along with me and maybe picked up a few tips and tricks along the way. Thank you for sewing with me. Have a wonderful day. Bye. Hello everyone. Welcome.